All right, good. Welcome everyone as always. Really appreciate your time. Hopefully, we're all going to learn a lot, get some good feedback. As always, try and make it. It gets harder and harder, and there becomes more and more people on these, right? But we still want to keep a little bit of collaboration. So people will man the chat bit, try to answer in line if there are key questions that it feels like it's good for us to answer across the whole group. Then we'll call those out when I'm not chatting, and hopefully I'm not going to chat too much this time. Then I'll definitely be manning that board. Anyway, in terms of agenda, I'm going to talk through a little bit about top high level stuff, how we're organising our product function, and a lot about how you can shape the roadmap. I'm then going to hand over to Dunk, who's going to walk us through UX and apps, a little bit about what's in 7.7. Show a bit of the Outlook plugin, enhanced list views. Actually, on that note, Tone, is 7.7 out today? Not quite, I'm guessing.
We are about half an hour away from pushing the button, I think. Yeah.
Oh right, well, so that's bloody good news, hey. Okay, so yeah, then we're gonna have a little break. So the feedback from the last time, because hey, we really struggled to fit everything in 2 hours. So we're going to do a break, 5-minute break, have a comfort break, grab a cup of tea. There's going to be a quick survey, and I guess it's an opportunity to feedback about what we should focus on, because we're struggling to get everything in 2 hours, right? They're going to hand over to Ash. She's going to talk about workflow and integrations, a bit of 7.7, load of stuff we've been doing to the workflow engine, demo of data table uploads, which is a feature that's going to come in 7.7.x. We've then changed around the agenda, mainly because we know Tony's going to overrun with Form Builder. So I'm going to do almost closing remarks and really talk about 2 areas we haven't really had a chance to talk about today, which is really data and AI and finance version 3. So I'll spend a little bit of a moment. Then we're going to have another break, another survey. I reckon that will take us about an hour and a half, maybe an hour and 3/4. At that point, we're going to hand over to Tony. He might take an hour, right? Feel free to drop off, but if you're loving understanding what's going on with Form Builder 2, then feel free to stay on. It's entirely up to you. Yeah, we won't be offended if people start dropping off. Or indeed, if you want to drop off now, that's fine as well, right? All good. Yeah, so that's that. Let me fly through my stuff, hopefully in about sort of 10 or 15 minutes. As always, thank you. We really appreciate the trust you put in us, and the investment that you enable us to make through your subscriptions, right? As always, we spend the bulk of that investment on product, and aim to continue doing so. But more than anything, really appreciate the trust you put in us. I spoke a lot about the last at the last user forum about essentially where we spend your money, right? So I'm not going to do that this time. I'm just going to talk about release cadence as always. Finally, 7.7 has gone out the door in the next half an hour. Tony, it'd be good to shout it out if it does get released to market in the next half an hour. I suspect there'll be one final bug. Yeah. Our focus is there's always the eternal project management triangle. You can't get all three bits of a triangle to work. We focus on value, and that's the amount of stuff we put in a release, and quality over time. Our perception is we've got that triangle slightly wrong. We're putting too much value in. Sorry, I should have turned my phone off. That's not to say that there's not lots of valuable things, and there won't be lots of valuable things in the future. We're just putting too much in. So we're going to aim to release more frequently, and that's about it, really. Right. So we're already most of the way, a good chunk of the way through 7.8 actually in terms of dev. Push that out some point at September. There will definitely be a 7.7.1. We're almost certainly going to put some of the list view stuff that Dunk shows that's super high value, and I will talk a little bit about business rules. So this is a big change, right? And as much as we think we've done an enormous amount of testing, right? Things will slip through the net. So if you're super gung-ho, you've got your cowboy hat on, or you've really got a desperate need, go 7.7. If not, maybe wait for 7.7.1 would be my advice, right? Anyway, that's sort of general release cadence, and it's we're happy that we've got it out of the door just about. These charts are already wrong. Generally what happens in our release cycles is we go, right, we're fixing our feature scope, and then there's lots of defects that get included. So 50 functional, over 50, might be about close to 60 now, functional enhancements, and broadly sort of 2 to 1 defects to functional enhancements tend to be the rule. So lots of stuff. I'm not going to go through it. They'll bore you to tears, right? Release notes again should be out on help today. I'm going to cover a couple of areas off. I'm not going to touch on UX because Duncan's going to talk about that, except to mention maybe one thing that Duncan's not going to talk about, which is the reparent tool. It's a menu command. You can reparent work items. Classic use case for that is repairing matters to different statements of work. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. It's a little bit risky sometimes in terms of it changes security and all that sort of stuff, but nevertheless, it's a super useful tool. In Data Composer, loads of stuff as always. We're always enhancing the ability to query data, embed it in rules, etc., etc. So I won't really go on that. A couple of UX enhancements for documents, ability for users to be able to favor their own templates, and also we call it deep clone. So when you're cloning a document template, you can choose to clone the underlying Word document as well. So you can go and take your top and tail, clone both the meta and the document template at the same time. It makes it a bit easier for people who are cranking out lots of documents, right? Not going to talk about workflow. Ash is going to talk about that. Am I going to talk about modular admin? Probably not. I'm going to talk a little bit about the assistant in a second. Anyway, about 50 functional enhancements, but the biggie is business rules. And the reason I'm going to spend a couple of minutes, and we have talked about this for maybe about 6 months, right, is there is work for you to do, right? Matching rules, the predecessor to business rules, was very loosely typed. And if I'm honest, not that great, right? So we've done a huge amount of work. We're really proud of business rules. But if you look at the list on the left, it touches absolutely everything in the application, right? You can use them in allocation rules. You can use it to display aspects. You can use it to filter your time codes. You can filter document templates, derive alternative templates, use it in workflow blocks, stripe options sets, stripe goods and services, stripe key dates, stripe charts of accounts. And finally, a new functionality of striping conceptually is we now basically can personalize all of the portals, widgets, pages using business rules. So fundamentally, we had matching rules that weren't strongly typed. And for those who've been with us for a while, you would have seen a warning in matching rules for quite some time saying, I've got no context, but it sort of worked without that context. And context being, I'm a work item or I'm a disputes matter or a real estate matter. That's the context, and it uses that to get Data Composer, right? So there's been a warning there for a while, but now we're migrating all this stuff, right? So my estimate, you will see when you upgrade to 7.7 a load of jobs in the assistant, and I'm going to maybe just flip into this for two. Have I got a browser open? Yes, I have. Yeah, cool. This environment's been updated to 7.7. Go on. If I was to click around these matter portals in this environment, I will see errors, right? I just will, because I use a lot of matching rules for various bits and pieces. So I'm just stealing some of Dunk's thunder there. Right. This is the one bit I wanted to focus on. Key part of our technology strategy we call evergreen. What does that mean? It means we're going to constantly refresh the application, but we're trying to minimize the amount of pain that you guys go through. Yeah. So as long as you keep up to date, this assistant will keep helping you going through those mini upgrade cycles, right? Depending upon the size of or the complexity of your implementation, I reckon it's going to take between 4 and 8 hours to address this list, right? So this is quite a complex config environment. It has kicked off how many upgrades? It's upgrades for each of those things on the left-hand list. So participant roles, goods and services, etc. It's migrating all of these, and it's done it successfully, right? However, it hasn't done everything. Yeah, it's had a go, but it's still a little bit worried we might have got it wrong. Yeah, so you will become familiar with this tool if you aren't already, and indeed it's going to be on every upgrade. We're going to be using more and more of this. So our CST team is on hand to help you with this if you get stuck. But you're going to see lots of have a look at your rule. It may be junk. Indeed, what you'll probably find for a lot of these, have I got any of these? It will actually say, yeah, it will go, I've got this rule and I think I want to upgrade it, but actually I can't see it being used anywhere. So it will give you the opportunity, if you want, just to clean up your system. Yeah. And I think that's super important, right? So, large, mature ShareDo systems have a lot of config. So housekeeping is super important, right? And these assistants are going to help you tidy things up, right? Hopefully that makes sense. I'm not going to talk about business rules, but I think it's important to stress that there's probably somewhere between 4 and 8 hours, might be a bit longer for some people, upgrade effort. Once you've done that upgrade in your VNext, you can then import that config into your UAT, into your production. Yeah, but there is effort to do it. There's the machine is only trying to be so good. Makes sense? Happy days? Cool. Okay. Going to spend a couple of minutes on shaping the future roadmap. So, I mean, broadly, you can raise enhancement requests. We often capture them on their behalf. You can do it for the CSMs through the expert services teams, or directly to the product managers. We like to consult with people on features because we get them better, right? So we welcome input into design documents. We welcome beta testing if that's applicable. I'm going to talk about major release consultation in a minute. I think we could always get better at collaboration on features, right? It involves your time, it involves our time, and plainly there are a lot more of you than there are of us. Yeah. So one of the things we're doing behind the scenes is bringing on more product managers to help manage the product collaboratively with you. A lot of people will know Dunk. Dunk's been with ShareDo for forever, right? And Dunk's looking after UX and apps. And Ash, he joined about 3 months ago, about 4 months ago. Yeah. He's going to talk in a minute. Has joined to look after workflow and integrations. Obviously, everyone knows Tony. And we're shortly onboarding product managers for finance, data, and AI. So we'll introduce them in a future meeting. So more people our side to work with, more people your side to hopefully build better product together. The final thing I want to talk about is major release consultation. So we've sort of just about done all the scope for release 8. I mean, whether it'll go on for a little bit longer, but we've sort of broadly done it. For those of us who are around 2 years ago, then we go through a process called major release consultation. And that's broadly going, well, as you as investors in the platform and I guess us as owners of the platform, like, what do we want to do? Where do we want to take it? What's our priority, right? We found the best way to do that is in a big old document. We could put it online, people could vote and stuff like that, but actually marking it up seems to be a really good way of collaborating it. So at some point, I guess it might be after summer, we will be giving you a document. And what does it contain? It's going to contain a lot of features, broken down, some that we've promised to people, so we'll tag those up, and some promises we might miss, but we take promises super seriously. So if we miss one, point it out. And then really that's for you guys to read through and go, have you missed stuff? What's important to you? Do you to collaborate on these, and then we'll bring it together. And then broadly, what we do is expect it to change, right? It changes at the moment we've done this document. We'll shove in new features, and something super important will fly in, and that's absolutely fine, right? But as we go through a major release, and major releases are taking us about 2 years at the moment, then we just cross them off, right? So the crossing off bit is on the right. We've sort of just about done this 70-80 page document. So yeah, sometime after summer or mid to late summer maybe, we'll give you a document. We'll spend time. We'll talk about it on a couple of these, and we'll aim to sort of not freeze that scope, but have broad consensus across the community by, I don't know, November, December, something like that. That is me. Any questions at this point? If not, I will hand over to Dunk. All good? Cool. Happy days. Over to you, Dunk.
Thanks, Ben. Let me share my screen. Right, is that working?
Yep.
You see me? Excellent. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I have been here a long time, Ben, but not as long as you, can I just say. 7 years this weekend, actually. So yeah, thanks for joining us. I'm the product manager for UX and apps at ShareDo. So I think the first thing I should probably do is explain UX for people who haven't heard of it. It means user experience, and it encompasses everything from the visual styling, so the user interface that you see, to the usability of the product. Yeah, so basically helping you solve your problems and addressing pain points. You know, a product that looks great but serves no purpose is no use to anyone. So as part of that going forwards, obviously to be able to address your problems and pain points, we need to know what they are. So there will be hopefully more opportunity for feedback going forwards, a bit like what Ben mentioned about the consultation. So yeah, I'm going to do some demos on what's new in the UX and app world in ShareDo 7.7. So these will be the modeler homepage, the visual refresh, and some chronology enhancements. I'll then show you our mobile app framework, which you might even not know that we've got one, but that's going to have some enhancements. So I'll show you what we've got. Then I'll do a demo of the Outlook add-in that is also imminent. And finally, I'll show you some list view enhancements that will probably make it into the next patch, because yeah, 7.7, the scope just grew and grew. Right, so on to demos. Okay, hopefully you can see my ShareDo. So in the past, if you're a configurator and you went to the modeler from the Launchpad, you probably would have just seen a placeholder page and would have then drilled into the left nav to find something to configure. So now you'll be in 7.7, you'll see this homepage. It's a good example of not really particularly any new features, but it's kind of improving the usability of the product. So instead of drilling into the work type modeler and then finding your work type, you can just click here. And let's say I want to edit prepare document. I can just type it in and I'm off and I'm configuring. If I go back to the modeler after doing something else and I click in here, I see that at the top of the list. So I kind of remember what I was working on. I don't lose my flow and I can just jump straight back in. Similar widgets for participant roles. So I can go and edit the ambulance role. Workflows, you can just edit them straight from here. And it also surfaces up your last import and exports and what Ben was just talking about as well, the assistants. So it'll tell you what jobs are waiting for your help and any completed jobs. So finally, and this is a bit of a new feature actually, is the top right hand corner. It was quite a requested feature in terms of knowing what people have been doing in Modeler. So it's an audit trail of what's changed. Let me just blow that up. And it basically tells you what people have been changing. So on this environment, it's all Wendy doing the editing, but you can see that she's been editing some pages, editing some types and so on. And we can drill into those and see what those changes are. And if we're really curious, we can then drop in and see exactly which parts of that have changed. So that's the audit trail in Modeler, and that's the Modeler homepage. So the next thing on my list for 7.7 is I'll look at chronology. So chronology has not changed much. As you can see, it's the same old chronology. But if let's say I want to see what Wendy's been doing in offers, so I've applied some filters there. I can see Wendy's offers now. And then I want to just jump somewhere else in the system. I'm back to chronology, and it's persisted my filters, so I don't lose where I was up to. The next thing I can do is I can actually edit the titles if I've got permission of these chronology entries. So I can add a bit of context if I want. We think this will be particularly useful for email trails. So if you've got a long email trail, each title is going to be the subject, the same subject. So you might want to add a bit of context to those by editing the titles. And then we can undo that if we want and restore the original one. Now, finally, in terms of chronology, we've got tags. So tags isn't a new concept in ShareDo, but in chronology, we can now edit those. So we can remove and we can add tags quite easily with this little interface. And once we've done that, we can then filter on the tags, and you can see it's just an easy way to categorize your chronology, basically. So that's the chronology changes in 7.7. The last thing I want to go through is the visual refresh. So we're taking the approach of incremental changes rather than big bang. It's a bit less jarring, and you'll be kind of drip fed these little improvements each minor release. So 7.7, 7.8, and so on. So you might already notice some changes. A bit more modern, rounded corners, shadows. We've got a new font. Draw your attention to a couple of bits here. There's the top nav is, I think, a lot cleaner. Out of the box now, you lose the labels, but if you want those back, you can always configure it yourself. The left nav now has this nice hover animation, which you had in Modeler, and it's a bit quicker to get around. You can just a single click on a category, and it'll take you to the first item in that category. And one last thing that might need your attention after upgrade. We no longer uppercase everything, so all of the titles of widgets. So we've done our best to fix up all of the titles so they look nice in capital casing. But if you've added your own widgets, you might just want to make sure they're consistent because the casing's no longer hidden by the fact that it's uppercased everywhere. Yeah, so that's the new visual refresh. Hope you like it. So next on the agenda, the mobile app framework. So as I say, you might not know we had one of these, but ShareDo doesn't work very well on mobile. It's a very complex app, and I'm not sure it would add much value if it did scale down to a mobile screen. So we think rather than wanting that, you'll probably want to implement your own mobile applications. So we make it easy for you. We've got a public framework that you can download, or if you've got developers working for you, they can download. And you can focus on specific user journeys. So you might have an engineer persona. So you might have a mobile app for them. So they can, out in the field, they can quickly enter data. Or you might have a manager who wants his own mobile app, his or her mobile app, and they can view their reporting data. So what the framework does is it lets you easily integrate with our authentication and drop components in, like common things like comments and dialogues and toolbars and so on. So I'll quickly show you how that looks. Right, so this all lives on GitHub. So if you've got a friendly developer, they'll know where to look and they can search for ShareDo. The sample mobile app that we provide, it's just a sample, like an example, if you like, a kitchen sink toolkit of things that you can do if you want to. So they can download that and spin it up. And if they spin it up, they'll see something like this. So as you can see, it looks quite nice on a smaller screen. It's all quite responsive. This particular sample, it just lists some work items that they can go in and edit. They can add time entries if they want. Just to give you an example of that, they can view comments. So that's also a component you can drop into your own apps, or they can progress milestones with this little pop-up. It's possible to add new tasks here. And if you install this on a mobile phone, it's a progressive web app, so it can be installed. They'll actually get push notifications as well, so you can get little pop-ups saying that a ShareDo's been dropped or that something needs your attention. So that's the mobile app framework. These are some enhancements that will be dropping in the next couple of days, but feel free to get in touch if you want some more help with that. Right, so next it is the Outlook add-in. Let me just find my Outlook. So for people who like working in Outlook rather than ShareDo for things like email journeys, this is for you. So it's fully contextual and auditable, so you'll see it in Chronology, anything you do. And there's a few flows that I'd like to demo. So the first one is inbound filing. So hopefully you can see in my inbox here, I've got an email. I'm just going to open it up. And because I've been to the Microsoft Marketplace and downloaded the ShareDo add-in, which will be available soon, I see this little icon in the top corner. So I'm going to click that. And because I've not run this before, it's asking me which ShareDo instance I want to connect to. So this will be just your vNext or your production environment. So I'm going to put that URL in. And then the next thing it's asking me to do is log in. Obviously, it needs my permission to act on my behalf in that ShareDo instance. So to create ShareDos and to log Chronology and so on. So now I've given that permission. What it's asking for is it's asking me which case this email relates to. So if there was a luggage tag in the subject, so luggage tag basically means like a case reference, it would automatically be able to find that and it would show it straight away. But I just want to show you the journey here. So it's showing me any recent cases I've been working on in ShareDo, or it lets me search for whatever I like. So I'm just going to put something in here and pick a case. So now it's happy. It says, right, I know this email is regarding this case. I could at that point just file it straight to ShareDo, but I'll just show you a few more things I can do. I want to tell it where to file the documents to. So it's giving me a list of the folders in that case. I could do this individually for each file, or I can just say, use this for all attachments. Also, it's saying that it doesn't know the person who sent me this. So do I want to add them as a participant to this case? So I'm going to say, yes, please. I'm going to check the details and say I'd like to add them as a witness. So I can submit that. And I think I'm happy now. So I'm going to say, right, send this inbound email to ShareDo. While that's spinning, I'll go and open that ShareDo environment and show you what's happened. So firstly, if I refresh, I'm hopefully going to see another participant here. Yeah, I've been added as a witness. Secondly, if I look at my tasks, I can hopefully see, there you go, there's a new inbound email that's appeared with all the attachments intact. And finally, if I look in Chronology, I should see, there you go, 26th of June, yeah, because that's when I received the email and I can see all the attachments there. I'm just going to check as well in the document repository that those documents did indeed find their way into the right folder. There we go, we've got 3 documents. We've got the body of the email as well. So it's fully auditable, fully traceable, and that's the inbound email journey. So now I want to just show you what we can do with outbound emails. So I've got a draft here. I'm sending Ben an email. I've dragged some attachments onto it. I'm going to open up the add-in. So again, it can't it can't work out which case this is involving because I've not given it any pointers here. So I'm just going to pick a recent case. And there's a few additional things here. So firstly, I can actually, as well as filing attachments into ShareDo, I can attach documents from ShareDo. So it knows which case it is. So it's just going to ask me which documents I want to attach. So I'm going to pick the duck that I just uploaded and attach that one. I think Ben will want to see that. Then it's saying that I've got all these participants on this case. Would you like to add them as recipients on the email? So I'm going to add David as a CC, and you can see as soon as I click the button, it just appears up here. And I'm going to add Wendy also. So I think she'll want to hear about this. And finally, there's no content in this email yet, so I can click the Content tab. And this lets me search all of my content blocks, or I can filter on these buttons, so I can find an email content block. There you go, there's a template here. I just want to include this, thanks. And it's given me a preview here with, if you notice, all of the tags are hydrated as well in the context of this case. So I'll insert this. And that looks ready to go. So clicking this button here, it sends this as a task into ShareDo. What it doesn't do is send the email. So Microsoft, probably for good reason, don't let add-ins send emails. So you'll then want to go and send it. But you can see from these notifications, it's been successfully filed in ShareDo. We'll go and have a look at that in a minute. I just want to show you a couple more things though. Once we've filed it to ShareDo, you see here a couple more follow-up actions. So firstly, you can record your time. So I can say, okay, I want to record this as some billable activity. You can either use units or duration, and those two are linked. And then I can put a narrative in here, client, emails, submit. So that's created a time entry in ShareDo. The last thing I can do here is create a follow-up task. So I might want to just create a task called Chase Ben. I'm the owner, and put a description in. There we go. So we've just created some time and a task in ShareDo. Let's go and have a look and see what's happened. So firstly, if I look in the correspondence folder, it remembered that we chose the correspondence folder earlier for this case, and so that's where it's filed all the documents by default. Secondly, in the chronology, we can see a new outbound email now with that template that we just chose. And if I look in my work list, I can see the follow-up task to Ben, or to Chase Ben. And then if I look in my time entries, there you go. It's my my time entry I created. So all of this happened from Outlook. I'm not actually adding anything at this moment, at this point in time, from ShareDo. I think that's everything in terms of the Outlook add-in. So there's one final demo, and this again is coming very soon. Can
I just add for the Outlook plugin? So to use the Outlook plugin, it's a dependency on you upgrading to 7.7. It is on a different release cadence. What does that mean? It means once you've got 7.7, we can incrementally add stuff to the Outlook plugin. We're functionally complete on it. We're QA complete, or first pass QA complete on it, and we're doing limited beta testing. But the idea is the Outlook plugin will probably go onto the marketplace, I think, within the next 3 weeks. But you do need 7.7 for it to work at all. Back to you, Duncan.
Cheers, Ben.
You can fulfill document expectations as well, Dunk, with your workflow as well.
Oh, I forgot that one. Yeah.
Cool
Thanks,
feature.
Thanks, Phil. Right, last demo, and then we're done. This is coming slightly after 7.7, probably in the first patch, and it's a bunch of enhancements to list views. I quite like this one. So there's the first thing I'll show you is some quick filters. So I'm in a list view here, task view, and I click the filter button, to zoom in a bit so you can see this. And these just let me quickly filter. So I can pick an owner, and I can say open or closed. There we go. So you can see you can build these filters up as well as using the filters in the columns as before. The next thing that happens is if I click away and click back again, just like Chronology, it's actually saved all my filters. This has been quite a requested feature again, so you kind of don't lose your flow. And just to show how you configure those quick filters, it's an option on the ribbon in the Manage Blades, in the Manage List Views blade, and I can remove or add those quick filters in. Right, so the next thing is you might see these tabs on the top left. So what are these? So these are groups of filters that can be applied by just clicking across. So a good demonstration is approvals. So rather than having different pages on the left nav for every single thing, so like my overdue tasks, my approvals, my outbound approvals, we can now have a single list view with multiple views, as we call them. So this list view is showing both tasks requiring my approval and also my tasks that need approval by someone else. And even the columns can change as well as we switch between them. So these views are configured in advance by your configurator, and they're called system views. And the editor looks a bit like this. So you give the tab a name, and you choose your filters. These can be any columns that are available. They don't have to be ones that are shown. And then you get these nice pickers as well to pick the values. So they are list view views. Now, finally, if I go back to tasks, what you might want to do is create your own view. So let's say I'm particularly interested in B2B client, and I'm interested just in the appointments that I've got with them. So I've got 3 appointments with them. I'm going to want to see this again, so I'm going to create my own personal view. So I click here, create as view, and I want to call it B2B appointments. So that's now saved as a view up here. So I can go off and see my tasks again, but if I come back to B2B appointments, there you go. And just to clarify again that this is just for me. This doesn't show for anyone else. It's a personal custom view for myself, which I can go and manage. I can change the ordering and I can delete it and so on. So that's the list view enhancements that are coming soon. Just to finish off, just a few things on the horizon in the UX world. So again, we'll keep doing these little incremental improvements over time. There's another word add-in coming, so we'll have 2 word add-ins, one for template authors and one for content authors. We'll have a Teams add-in as well at some point, and there'll soon be some Copilot integration, so you'll have some AI goodness. I think that's it. Time for a break. If you want a brew, I'll hand over. Thank you.
I think over to you, Ash. Yeah.
Cool. Right. I'll just start sharing my screen then. Can everybody see it?
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, as Ben mentioned there, very, very brief intro. So I'm Ash. I've joined ShareDo about 4 months ago now as a product manager specifically for workflow and integrations. So I'll be the person coming to you with anything related to all the new third parties we choose to integrate with, and any enhancements or quality of life or improvements or new bits of the workflow engine that we're looking to make. So I'm going to take you through 2 bits today. So for integrations, I'm going to take you through some of the stuff that we've got on the roadmap, and also how we're choosing to separate product plugins, client plugins, and move that away from sort of the core platform. When we get to the workflow, I'm going to talk about some of the stuff we've recently done and some of the stuff that we've got on the horizon for making incremental improvements to the workflow engine too. So first off, I'm going to talk about the fact that I've used the term splitting plugins here, and by that, what I mean is we're going to make product plugins almost a first-class citizen of their own. So at the moment, any plugins that we develop for ShareDo go into the core platform. They go out to everybody that uses ShareDo, and as we grow, we want to avoid that kind of problem where we're shipping too much stuff to everybody. So what we find is that everybody wants something, but nobody wants everything that ShareDo has. So if you've been around the platform for long enough, you'll know that in most of the categories that you can see on screen here, from finance, SMS, external searches, there's a lot of different providers that we have, and all of you will want some of them, but there's very, very few of you. I don't think there's anybody that has every single plugin or uses every single plugin that ShareDo offers. So as we continue to grow and expand to make life easier for people to just sign up and join ShareDo and integrate lots more third-party tools, we don't want to keep making that platform bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's one of the reasons now that we're currently looking at splitting product plugins out of the core platform. So client plugins have existed for quite some time. You've always been welcome to build your own tools to integrate with ShareDo or work with us to help build plugins for you. We're going to continue to do that, but we're also going to continue to build high quality integrations for ShareDo ourselves. The difference here being that we're going to just stop shipping them by default as we make new plugins. So the idea is think about it a little bit like having a menu of plugins where we can switch on or you can ask for certain things and we'll just put them into the platform for you. This allows us to avoid things like bloating the platform, causing sort of future headaches. So I'm trying to look at the chat as well at the same time. Avoiding future headaches where we make the platform too large too quickly or anything like that. So they're only really there if you need them. And ultimately what we hope this gives you guys a little bit more agency so you can choose what you want and a little bit more flexibility with that too. One of the last things we want to do in this area is improve documentation around plugins to make this a little bit easier for yourselves or third parties to build their own platforms. And that's something you'll see a little bit more with other SaaS platforms out there, where hopefully some of the third party you work with might choose to build a plugin to work with ShareDo rather than us or yourselves having to build that. So moving to talk a little bit about the current state of the integrations roadmap. So as we stand, so one of the things that we've been working on recently is working with a company called Legal. They do, amongst other stuff, some KYC and KYB checks. We're at the point now where we are in QA, not just KYC actually, as it says there. That should be for everything that we do with Legal. So the KYC checks and the KYB stuff too. So we're just going through the sort of the final stages of that, building some sample workflows, some sample actions, some sample tasks to go with that. So if you choose to, and Legal will actually be one of the first plugins that we develop in this product plugin style. So you choose to take the Legal product plugin, we add it to the ShareDo platform, and it will add all of that good stuff that goes along with it. So you just go in and either choose to set up your own API keys and stuff like that, and it'll come with all of the kind of workflows, or at least for the default setup that we recommend, some of the workflows, some of the task types, some of the phase plans, stuff like that to go along with it. Next up, still in build at the moment, and I'll talk about a little bit more later, is data table upload. And the reason I say I'll talk a bit more about that later is I'm going to do a demonstration running through where that's up to at the moment. There's about 3 or 4 weeks work still left on that, so there is still some stuff that I'll talk about as we do the demonstration that is in progress or coming soon. But there is some really exciting parts of data table upload that are finished and I will be able to show off slightly later. And lastly, in the current cycle for 7.x, will be an upgrade to Loqate. So I'm sure a lot of you do use Loqate. So for address lookup or address completion and stuff like that, we're going to do an upgrade on that shortly. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a slide or two's time. Just quickly, horizon scanning for what we've got coming in 7.8, 7.9 onwards potentially. I'm not going to go into too much detail on these because they're still in the kind of design and planning phase. Google Address Lookup will be joining Loqate, and com.addressfinder.au that we've also got in there. So that'll be another different service that you're available to choose to use if you want to use a different service instead of Loqate. We are right approaching the very end of the design stage for an MCOL portal for money claims online. So we'll be passing that over to development in the very near future. So trying to take that whole process and make it a digital journey without having to do any kind of human interaction there, any sending emails backwards and forwards, and being able to do as much of that as possible without leaving the ShareDo platform. So that's quite exciting. And as I say, we're very near the end of the design stage of that. And hopefully we're passing that to ready for build in the very near future. One thing we are going to work on for the next sort of set releases is AI dictation in ShareDo. At the moment, there's voice notes and stuff like that, which you'll probably be aware of in the platform. And I know that if you're using sort of Microsoft Word, you can use the built-in dictation there for dictating documents. One thing that we're going to do as part of this is make it so that anywhere that within ShareDo there is a rich text field, you can dictate, and we'll have an AI transcription service to take that, keep the recording, but also store the actual text in whatever fields that happens to be. So we'll potentially talk about whether you want to use a default service that we provide or make an option so that you could use a different service that you're choosing. And lastly, the really high level ones, the stuff down in 7.9 onwards that we have a loose plan to go and do some stuff on, but we haven't dug too much into the detail of yet. So Copilot generative AI integration, some telephony integration, and a whole host more portals related to dealing with different courts, and also looking to get some stuff in there for vehicle data searches, for looking up insurance providers, looking up makes, models, cars, etc. Cool. Okay, so I did briefly say that I'd mention some stuff about legal here. So as I say, we're at the point now where we're developing what some of those default workflows might look like within the ShareDo platform. But as it stands, we can now do the stuff that works with legal for doing everything from a full KYC check and a load of the different steps that you can integrate from the legal platform there. So how much due diligence you want to go through, stuff that you want to do you want to scan the passports, driving licenses, all that sort of stuff. Sending those through to people, asking them to do the documents, and passing the success, failed, etc. back into ShareDo, whether you want a human being to go and review it, and a load of other different bits and pieces on that too. In terms of doing the KYB stuff, it can do sanctions checks, it can do company reports. You can then look at if you want to do further KYC checks on the individuals involved in those companies too. So that's really exciting and is approaching the QA phase of its life cycle at the moment, and should be heading out in the very near future. Got next. So I did briefly mention Loqate. And the reason that I just wanted to highlight this is some of you, if you work with Loqate yourselves directly, some of you will work with Loqate directly, some of you will just use as a partner and submit queries to Loqate through us. Now, Loqate have recently announced that they will be deprecating some of the APIs that they use for address lookup in the sort of the final quarter of this year. And what we're going to do as part of this upgrade in the near future is just update our Loqate integration, so you shouldn't be affected by that. So coming very quickly in a 7.7x release somewhere will be an upgrade to Loqate for using Loqate's upgraded API tools there. Right, moving into a section on some of the workflow stuff. So there's a few different bits in here. So some quality of life upgrades, some UI UX improvements, and some other tools that we'll be adding in there. So I'll briefly just look at the state of workflow and the roadmap that we've got there. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but as Tony mentioned, if 7.7 is going out in the very near future, you'll get a whole set of release notes made available, which will detail all of these kind of changes. And it will even go into detail on a few of them, talking about how to be used. And I'll show you a couple of screenshots from some of the stuff that's in the QA section in just a second. So yeah, some really exciting ones there, and also some stuff planned for 7.8. So we've made about 18 different changes to workflow in the 7.7 release, things to make your life easier, to add extra workflow blocks, to add extra tools to utilize within parts of ShareDo. And we've already planned a whole load more for in 7.8, including quality of life improvements for that again. So the exciting bit really, show and tell, or talk through some of those workflow improvements now. So the first one, I know a load of people will be quite happy with this because I've made this mistake myself a number of times, having only been at ShareDo 4 months, is workflow will now stop you from navigating away if there are unsaved changes. So that should be a thing of the past, where there'll be no more stuff where you lose all the work you've done on creating visual workflow. So there's now some saved changes in there. Data type now uses a tree view to accurately reflect the hierarchy. Sorry, tried to say that one too quickly. One of the enhancements here, you can see that we've added a button so you can just copy the variable names and stuff like that, rather than having to sort of manually highlight them, right click, copy and stuff like that. So it should make life just a little bit quicker doing things of that nature. This is an interesting one. We've changed it so when you create a new workflow step, it doesn't default the optimal path to on. We've had a lot of feedback over time and generally said that there tend to be much less steps that fit the optimal path than other steps that happen to flow around it. So as it stands, it makes more sense that the optimal path is something you switch on rather than have to switch off on way more steps. So that's a change that's coming in 7.72. Just a UI improvement here. So the if toolbox is what it used to look like on the left-hand side and what it's been updated to on the right-hand side. As you can see, by splitting it over, giving them a single line each, it makes it a lot easier to view when you've got longer conditions in there. Just a really short example there, but hopefully that will make your life a little bit better there too. And another cool one, so the ability to set and pin rich text comments. So obviously you can now put HTML within those comment blocks, but also set them to be pinned within the workflow toolbox as well. That's how they'll appear in the latest comments bit in your portals. Cool, so there's a load more. As I said, that was about 5 or 6 changes that have been part of the workflow improvements there. There was about 18 or 19 included within 7.7. So yeah, lots of stuff that'll make your life better. And when the full set of release notes for 7.7 comes out, you'll be able to see all of those in a bit more detail. So I'm going now to talk about and give you a bit of a demonstration on the data table upload functionality that Ben mentioned earlier. So you may know already, there's been some data table upload functionality within ShareDo previously. You may have used these in the past. And what we're doing is trying to make a better, improved, and hopefully a better user journey version of the data table upload, make it a little bit smarter, make it so that it uses things like the assistant within ShareDo to help you build out what you're looking to get. So the way data table upload works is that you provide it with a bunch of data that you want to do, use, or action within ShareDo. It'll ingest it and then do some clever stuff. Obviously, like everything else within ShareDo, the sky's the limit, depending on how simple or complex you want to get with things like workflows, business rules, phase plans, and all of the other stuff that's at your disposal within the platform. We're just going to build a really, really quick workflow that will ingest the data, record it, and log it. So I'm just going to go into Modeler, to workflows. We'll quickly create a new one, but what I'll use this one that I created just before the demo today. So again, really, really simple. This is just to use the data that is passed in from a data table upload and log it out. You could use this for all sorts of more complicated things. Say, for example, you wanted to upload and create a load of brand new tasks or matters off a set of data that you might have from an external service. Or you might have a real estate matter and you want to upload a list of plots that they've got for sale. So you can do all sorts of stuff like that and more. Really, the sky's the limit, depending on your imagination and what you want to build within the workflow engine. So what you have to do is add those input parameters and then just set them to be logged here. So I'll create a brand new one to show you what that looked like. So we've got a brand new visual workflow here. So all I'm going to do is go into data and add some input parameters. So within the file that I'm actually going to be uploading, I'll just show you how that looks. So here's the CSV that we're using. It just contains some matter references, names, phone numbers, addresses, city, county, and postcodes. One thing I will point out is that the data table upload that I'm demonstrating here will support a whole host of different file types, not just CSVs. So it'll support Excel files, it'll support, and that's both XLS and XLSX, and it will also support named tables within Excel too. So I'll show you what that looks like a little bit later, but in the file that I've got, I'm just going to add some of those variables in here. So ref, mandatory, yeah, cool, we'll add another one, name, cool, I've got more, phone number, I'll type this morning, save all these, just been overwriting what I've done. But cool. So just an example of adding some of those there. So I'll go back into the one that I've created already, and you can see here what I've done is I've added all of those 7 that you saw in the CSV that I showed earlier. And then all I've done is gone into the toolbox and add a log variables toolbox item. There's already one in here, so I won't bother, to this element here. And all I've done is I've logged each of those variables and made sure that they're going to be posted out and recorded as we go through and use this workflow later. So I'm just going to save this. And I'm going to go out of here and back into admin. Features, data table upload. Cool. So you can see here there's a whole bunch of different templates that exist. I've created some of these earlier just to be used as a demonstration. Craig has been working on this, created some too. But you can create as many as you like in here, and they can be used for all sorts of different things. You can map them into different workflows, etc. So I'll go through, create an example here. So we'll create a brand new one. Give it a description. More useful than what I just put there. Context for this is global rather than it being based on a specific work item. And then the load method that we're going to use is we're going to base this off a workflow. And in this case, the workflow that I just created and showed you earlier. So Ash user forum. So what it's doing there is by giving it the context of which workflow it's using, that it's using the workflow and which workflow it's using, is it's found that this template has configuration issues, means it won't be able to run. So it knows now that that particular workflow is expecting a whole bunch of mandatory fields. So as I went through that workflow earlier and created it, you'll have seen that some of the options I set were mandatory and some of them were optional. So you can see there, address, city, county, matter ref, and postcode are all mandatory and they haven't been mapped. So this is one of the areas that we're going to be looking to add some more to in the coming weeks as we continue to work on data table upload. If you've used the assistant functionality within ShareDo previously, one example that Ben gave earlier is on the business rules that's coming soon, is we'll be looking to create a similar kind of functionality here to help you automatically create those mappings. So we know the fields that exist within the workflow. We know the fields that we need to map for that workflow. And we're going to try and create some default columns for you so you don't have to go through and create these all one by one. It might not be perfect, but it might save you some time and you might be able to get, let's say, 80% of the way there by, creating the ones that the assistant suggests for you. So I'll just create a few here. Add a reference, type as it text, it's a mandatory field. We're just going to map it to matter reference, simple as that. If you want to, you can put some sample data in there. You don't have to do that, it's entirely up to you. Go through, we'll pick a couple more. But what we'll do is we'll do it on the demonstration one that I picked up. So we'll do this June user forum demo that I started populating earlier for this reason. Add a ref, add a column, name. county, and lastly, postcode. So you can see there, an assistant that we create for this might help save you some time, especially if you've got a spreadsheet or a workflow that has quite a lot of columns in it. So I'm just going to save that now, and you can see the error has disappeared. It knows that all of the mandatory fields have a mapping. I'm just going to map these to say it so it knows that they're mandatory. Now, what you saw earlier when I was setting mandatory fields is whether they are mandatory to the workflow or not. So there's kind of a two-step check here. So what it's looking for here and telling you and checking on is whether the field that you will be uploading in the file is mandatory to the actual template, and in which case you should probably set that as yes. And what we were looking at earlier is whether something is mandatory to the actual workflow. Now, one of the things that we do as we develop the assistant here is we might look to sort of automatically create these and map these and match them for you. So mandatory is off phone number because I know that we've not got phone number in there for every single record. So I'll switch some of the others because I have got them and I do want them to be mandatory fields. I'm going to save that. So this is the Ash June user forum demo. So if we go to the Ash June user forum demo, and we're going to go through now and hit upload. So four-step process here. So we'll just give it a name. So forum demo, put the date in there, and I'm going to select from files. So if we go to downloads here, see that I've got a few different sample files, all for names and addresses here, similar to the CSV that I showed you a minute ago. The one that I'm going to use for this section is just CSV addresses, but I'll click through a few of them and I'll show you what happens when you load them in. So for example, if I pull this XLS addresses file and hit next, what it's going to ask me for now is the range from within Excel where the data for this is located. Now, the data in that file is just exactly the same as the CSV that I've showed you, but I'll provide it with the Excel range, ask it to load the data, and you can see that it's pulled through that same data. It'll also do this with named tables. So if you happen to have an Excel file or a bunch of Excel files that have named tables, rather than being asked to input a range here, you'll get a drop-down field where you can select the name of the range table that you want to use. Sorry, select the name of the named table that you want to use. So I'm just going to change back to use the CSV because we've got some demonstrations set up for those CSVs. So we'll go through here. You saw a second ago, it loaded that up and showed some demos. Now we've got a header row here. So I'm just going to switch the header row off. And I'm going to switch all of these on. And one of the other things that we're working on this week actually is trying to get it to automatically map some of these header rows from the Excel file or the CSV file to the template that you just saw me create. We're going to try and do this based off matching the name. It won't always be able to match the name, especially if the column headers in your Excel file don't match, but as close as they are, we will try and make an effort to match those for you to reduce that workload. So I'm just going to match them here. So matter reference matches matter reference, name matches name, phone number, etc. all the way through. You can see there I switched off the first row. You can switch off a number of other different rows if you wanted to, or you want to just get rid of them. Now, one improvement that we've got in here that we didn't have in previous versions of the data table upload is that we are now scanning them before we actually process it. So you can see there, we've not actually uploaded this data into ShareDo yet. But what we have done is we've had a quick look through that. Like I said, based on the rules, based on the template, we expect what's going to happen is 5 rows will upload successfully. There's another 5 rows that might have a problem, but will probably still upload. And there's a number of rows that will just error out, in this case, 0. Any of the rows that it spots at this stage as an error, we just won't process and we won't upload into ShareDo because it knows it's just going to hit a problem later down the line. Likely that it's missing a mandatory field or something similar. So I'm going to click next on this one now. And as you can see there, it's starting. So you can see it's Q6, 3. So this number's dropping as it goes through and runs them. Success, 2, 5, 8, 10. And it's finally completed all of them. So you can see there, this is the data that's been uploaded. And if I just quickly now click onto one of them, this is something that you weren't able to do previously as well. So you can actually look at the workflow that's executed against each of these individually. So you can see what's happened as it, so the current value of that is that, the current value of that is that. So this is all based on the logging step that I added into that workflow earlier. I'm just going to try one or two more. I've created some other files that have some errors in and stuff like that, so you can see how that might look and how that might behave. So I'll take this one instead, which was a warning template that I created. So it looks exactly the same as the others, except I've set some of the other fields to be mandatory or not mandatory based on the result to get out of showing you how that looks. So this one here, show warning based on the address. Cool. So remember the mappings that I've already set for those because the headers are the same, which is a nice touch. You go through and see now it's noticed that there's no county that should be visible in one of the fields. Previously, you just saw all these other ones that said phone numbers. So now it's spotted that the county is missing from one of those files. Can we try and upload it? Yes. We'll see what happens. Does it still upload all 10? Yes. So because the field that was missing was optional, not mandatory, it did warn us to say that we might encounter a problem, but it did still manage to successfully upload all of them because it was only an optional field. So again, similarly, if we want to, we can go through, look into all of these one by one, see what happened, see what the workflow did, and any triggers that were created because of that. Lastly, if we just go into the error version. So again, similar. So we've got mandatory here on county, and I know there's some counties missing. We set mandatory here on phone number, and I know for a fact there's some phone numbers missing too. So if we go through and we upload a file against this one. Then go next. Cool. We'll switch off the matter reference from there, switch these back on. We're currently discussing what some UI, UX elements might look like for these top fields in terms of trying to reduce the number of clicks that you have to make for switching things on, switching things off. So we're still tweaking that a little bit, and by the time it gets released to all of you guys, we'll have made some further changes there and hopefully automatically map some of this for you as well. So I'll just try and go through here. So you can see this time it's noticed that it thinks there will be 4 successes, and it's highlighted that 6 rows will definitely cause an error because there are mandatory fields that are not present in the CSV that we're trying to upload. Now, what it will do is we just won't bother trying to upload these into ShareDo because we know that they don't meet the expectations of those mandatory fields. So it will only try to upload the 4 rows that it knows will be successful. Cool, so you can see there it queued them, it's running them, and now it's processed all of those too. And that's completed as expected. So yeah, that is the end of the demonstration on data table upload. I know there's been some questions popping up in the chat while I've gone. So once I've finished presenting and hand back over to Ben, I'll make an effort to answer some of them. But lastly, before I hand over, just final slide, I want to talk about stuff that's on the horizon for workflow and product integrations. So the big things that we've got coming are but adding in Google Places external search to go alongside Loqate and com.addressfinder.au. The MCOL portal integration, which I mentioned, which will hopefully make your life easier so that anybody doing MCOL claims doesn't need to leave ShareDo, and it should make life easier for doing large batches of MCOL claims in particular. AI dictation and a load more quality of life enhancements to the workflow engine. So thanks for listening to me. I'll shut up now and hand back over to Ben.
Thanks, Ash. That was super good. Hey, I maybe a couple of points to add to what Ash has said. Data table upload is designed to be a very, very flexible solution, but it's running on the workflow engine, so it is async, right? So don't expect the data to stream in massively quickly. It does, however, have client plugin support, so we can create better upload, faster upload mechanisms. Indeed, we're going to ship with a few of those for some of the more volume use cases we see. such as mass loads of goods and services items, and a few clients use that sort of functionality extensively. The other thing I just wanted to add is, I mean, Ash is managing a huge portfolio of integrations. I forget how many we support, but it's well over 30 now. So there is a constant curation process of that, because there are the common ones that pretty much everyone uses, right? We're all using iManage or NetDocs or Office 365. That's dead easy. But a lot of the other providers, it's hard for us to support all of them. Hey, so we're always trying to do the most good for the most number of people, if that makes sense. So feel free to, I mean, lots of requests in the chat. There's going to be I think a survey in a minute, but ultimately we're going to try and prioritize for the greater good, if that makes sense. I'm going to do the almost closing remarks, which will take me, I don't know, 5 minutes, something like that. We'll then have another short break, and then it'll be Tony for Form Builder for as long as Tony wants to do Form Builder. Hey, so let me share my screen, and I'll just go through literally 3 or 4 slides about what's coming up. Which screen is it? That screen? Happy days, right? Cool. Yeah, so our usual sort of dates of the diaries. So I don't know how many training sessions we do a month now, but it seems to be a lot. So as always on the website, there's loads of training options for you. So I think we've got, Teresa, we've got at least planned to the end of the year, I suspect, in there, and possibly beyond that. Yeah. So feel free, go onto those. Training's always free. So take advantage of that if you want to learn good stuff. The next thing I wanted to do was talk about 2 key bits of the roadmap, which we haven't had a chance to talk about today. So the first one is Finance V3, and it is a massive functional enhancement rather than necessarily a change to all of our finance stuff. And broadly, it's being drip fed in roughly 3 buckets, right? So our fees engine is being completely rewritten. And we're well into 7.8. So there's now a fees template designer. There's a new UX for quotes. There's a new UX for actuals. It integrates completely with time recording. It performs financial transactions for revenue recognition. You can write off fees. You can import fees via Modeler. And is starting to do a lot of the tax calculations related to fees. So that's 7.8. We're well in the development of that. 7.9, we're going to move on to billing, new UX for invoices, billing wizard, approval for bills, etc., etc. And then we're going to start looking at some of the accounting, financial periods, client accounts, etc., which is less well defined, but will come towards the back end of the year. I'm working on this. I'm going to bring in a dedicated product manager shortly, and I'm collaborating with I think 2 clients at the moment. If you want to take advantage of some of this functionality, I really would appreciate feedback. Some of this stuff in 7.8 is going to go into beta pretty soon, so having more eyes on it would be really appreciated. So if you can invest the time, and I appreciate not everyone can, then feel free to email me and I will get you access to some of the beta stuff for 7.8, talk you through it, and then you've got an opportunity to shape it pre-release, because I'm conscious that we will not have got everyone's use cases right in the first release, and it may take us 6 months to get them right. So early input into this area, really super appreciated. The next area I just wanted to focus, so that's a massive piece of work, Finance V3. There's lots of people working on that within our organization. Equally is the whole AI and data roadmap. I've spoken about this quite a few times. We're well into this now, but again, big piece of work and some fundamental changes that are going to come through. So I just wanted to talk you through, and I hate architecture diagrams, right? But I just wanted to talk you through I have done this a couple of times, but really just help everyone understand it. So broadly, all the old reporting architecture gets ditched. and I'll talk through the implications of that. We're moving to a fabric-based architecture. The first thing, so starting top right, it is near real time. So the data you put in ShareDo appears in your reporting database in very near real time. It's usually sub-second, but occasionally a bit more latency, but not much latency. We're then transforming it into a new version of the ShareDo star schema, which is your ShareDo warehouse middle block. I think you can see my mouse pointer. Again, that's in near real time, sub-second. We are moving all of our standard reports as examples onto the new warehouse schema and using, I think it's called direct access. But what does that mean? That means your Power BI reports are near real time as well. Again, sub-second data, well, a couple of seconds maybe, data latency. If you've done lots of reports, we will continue to support the old reporting mechanism for some time. Certainly we're not going to drop it imminently, but you will need to change those reports to this new reporting model over a period of time. And you gain, right? You get full access to all the data. The schemas are being built dynamically. So that's sort of a feature upgrade, I suppose, towards real-time reporting and a better schema. So everything I talk about from this point on is new, right? So what we will allow, it may end up being a premium feature. I'm not entirely certain. We try and avoid all premium features, but we're starting to use a lot of compute power now from Azure, so it may end up as a premium feature once we benchmarked it, is the ability for you to design your own custom warehouse schemas within a new data extract designer within ShareDo Modeler. What does that mean? It means for those of you who write Power BI reports against ShareDo, it's quite normalized, denormalized rather. So it doesn't entirely make sense. What you can do in the data extract designer is create dedicated mini data marts for things like tasks or matters or payments or whatever, and it's super easy to consume from the report from Power BI. You'll also be able to mount all that data in your environments. What does that mean? It means you've got real-time access within your warehouses, and this is generally for the larger clients, right? To near real-time data coming out of ShareDo. So it's your data, you can get at it, right? So that's quite a big feature enhancement and will help a lot of clients, I think, who've got specific reporting requirements, particularly those who are insurance focused and they're producing loads of BDXs and all of that wonderful stuff, right? So that's good. The next piece that is leveraging on that, we've done some early work on it, but is we'll be then taking the concept of these custom data extracts and running it through an ML engine. I can't remember if I put it on this slide deck or not. Or maybe do it next time. So we've got about 15 use cases where we'll be embedding advisors in the front end experience saying, yeah, recommended reserves is this. Know your customer is X, know your customer is Y, etc., etc. I'm hoping I'll start to demo this stuff maybe around September, possibly a month or two later, but in that sort of time. It's definitely this year, right? And broadly, what we spoke about last time is what we're aiming to do is give you data scientist level capabilities within the platform without you needing to be data scientists, right? So we're simplifying the whole experience of creating correlated data analysis and, more importantly, delivering it to your users. So it should be in the same way Ash, I think, demonstrated some really quite sophisticated functionality, and rightfully people are going, oh, we can optimize this and this way and this way, but nevertheless he achieved incredible sophistication of functionality in a few minutes. It's going to be exactly the same for this piece, but I just wanted to highlight this is something that we're throwing a lot of effort into, and hopefully by the next user forum, possibly the one after, we'll be showing some of the results for that. I'll pick up the questions once I've finished. That's me done in my almost closing remarks. As always, thank you very much. We're going to take a short break, very short, I think maybe 3 or 4 minutes. And then the rest of the session is all Tony and Form Builder 2. Tone, how long do you reckon you're going to take on that?
Overview about half an hour, total runtime about an hour.
All right, cool. So feel free, stay for as long as you like. So thanks again. Tone, have we released version 7.7 since?
Check. Waiting to press the button. Let's say yes.
Okay, so
yes.
some point during Tony's demo, that will go out the door as well. Cool. As always, thanks very much. I will. We'll have a quick break and a survey. I'm guessing will magically appear on the screen. Yeah.
I have got just one question this time. So what one technology would you like to see ShareDo integrate with, and what would it do? So I could see all of those furious comments coming in whilst Ash was demoing there, but here's your forum to tell us.
Sure, I'll regret asking that.
Yes, you will regret.
Yeah, that's 30
that.
plus is about to go to 60 plus.
Yeah, there's a lot of legal tech, isn't there? There's a lot of legal tech. Oh, HubSpot's coming. HubSpot's coming. That's pretty.
I think we've got
Sebastian,
Ollie on the call. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I was going to say that. It's our own marketing team.
Yeah, that was me. You got me.
3 E's there already.
Video
Coffee
of the live
machine.
button press. Yeah.
I'm going to get a cup of tea. We'll maybe take 2 minutes, yeah? And then Tone start.
Okay, over to you.
Okie dokie. Hopefully you can see a hairy ShareDo logo.
Yep.
Everybody. Yeah, cool. Okay. Morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I'm going to take you through. We did this at the last user forum, but obviously it was kind of early days, so it's moved on a little bit. I'm going to take you through Form Builder 2, kind of where we're up to, what direction we're going in. I'm going to keep it largely demo focused. I will warn you that whilst Ash was talking, I fixed a bug. So I'm running quite literally on edge code. So some of this may go horrendously wrong, but let's see how we get on. I'll start with a couple of slides and I'll keep it relatively short on the slides. So just to set context for those that perhaps weren't on the last user forum, just to kind of describe where we are today with Form Builder, and then I'll talk about where we're going. So at the moment, everybody's probably familiar with Form Builder and what you have to do to create forms. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but we've actually got 3 engines in play that are all doing similar things, but just building on top of each other. So we've got the Forms engine version 1, which is where you can create your form definitions. It's kind of limited in terms of what you can do. There's about 20 different input types that you can create. You're really limited in terms of being able to control layout exactly how you want it to be, to add custom controls and custom inputs to that form builder. And also, more fundamentally, under the covers, everything that you do with Form Builder is actually going into untyped storage, which means, quite simply, if you create a Form Builder field that's a date, you cannot currently do a date range search type thing in a list view or whatever against that attribute, because ultimately everything's stored untyped under the covers. It does go into index a little bit more typed, but we still can't do any of that funky search stuff. From there, that gets pulled across into the aspects engine. So you've now got your form that you've designed that's a reusable piece of data and view, and then you pull that onto things like work types. So you say, for this matter type, I'm going to use that form. And the aspect editor as well has got other things. It's not just about building the forms, it's about building the other controls that you want to see on there. So things like, I want to see the ribbon, and I want to see the blade header. I want these navigation buttons at the bottom. And it's a little bit disjointed. So there's these 3 engines in play that are all doing similar but subtly different things. So where we're going is this. So we're taking all of that stuff and building it into one thing that's built off the back of this hierarchical type system. Now, you've actually seen the hierarchical type system in play a few times as we've gone through various demos today. And this is where we have things like strings, but then we also have specific types of string which represent an option set or whatever. Everything that we build from this point onwards in terms of describing data will be described by this hierarchical type system. I'll cover it in a lot more detail in a minute as we go through some of the demos. But what that means is that hierarchical type system is kind of the underpinning mechanism for all of the stuff that we want to put on top of it. So everything that we build as an entity will have fully typed storage underneath. So when you create something that's a date, it's going to be stored as a date. It's going to go into the index as a date, and you can do date range searches on it. We're going to capture a lot of additional field level metadata as well. So you can think of when you create an entity in Form Builder at the moment and you say, well, let's say you're capturing first name, surname. You're actually capturing something that's beyond just those two strings. You're capturing personally identifiable information. And in terms of things like GDPR, whilst we know we've got static fields throughout the system in things like the ODS person record and stuff that represents personally identifiable information, if you create stuff that's in Form Builder, we have no clue about it. So that makes it a little bit hard to do things like right to be forgotten. You can do the high level stuff and manipulate the ODS record, but trying to find stuff that's nested deep within your custom data is kind of difficult. So that's where field level metadata is going to come in, allowing you to specify that, hey, I'm creating this field and it's PII. Then, in addition to that, there'll be multiple views that you can put on top of these entities. So you'll define the entities, you define the data structure, and then you'll be able to put multiple views over the top using a no-code visual designer. But as always, we try and do everything as much as we can with no code, but there's always a low-code option available to you to drill into a little bit more detail and do more funky and more advanced things. And then there's also a level below that, which is, I want to go into code and write some custom controls. And then there's yet another level below that, which is I want to open Visual Studio and create some C# code. But everything that I'm going to show you today, I'm going to concentrate mostly around all the no code stuff. I'm going to show you a little bit of the low code and then a little tiny bit of the slightly more code stuff as well. This does mean it's going to be quite an impactful change because everybody's currently got all of the work items and ODS types and all of that defined with lots of aspects and stuff. So we will be building a legacy aspect adapter into this as well, which should mean that the assistants that we've seen today will basically tell you that everything's fine and it's been automatically upgraded. But what that will be doing is pulling in your existing form definitions, your existing aspect definitions into this world, but inside of this legacy aspect adapter. So at any point you can go in and start changing it to use some of the more advanced new stuff. Anyway, that's enough chat. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. We're basically consolidating everything that we're doing in terms of custom data capture into one engine that we can use everywhere. So let me show you. Okay, find my browser. And hopefully we've got a browser. Okay, so as with everything, we access the Form Builder stuff through Modeler, and this build that's running off my machine, that, like I say, may break. I've obviously got two instances of this in here. I've got the old Form Builder definition stuff sat right alongside the new stuff. I've cleared this down, so I'm starting from scratch. I've got no new stuff in here whatsoever. So the first thing that we want to do when we're creating a custom form and custom data capture is we want to start by defining data. Now, I want you to think about data not as a single cohesive record. If I'm creating, let's say, an incident to go against a matter type, I'm going to have things like the incident description, the incident severity, the location of that incident, and then maybe I've got a couple of witnesses as well, and those two witnesses have got addresses. So I can break that down into more composite blocks, such as address and statements, and then I can compose those together into some higher level entity that reuses those pieces. So in order to build that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by creating a new type. So this, I'm going to create the address type. I'm just going to create a couple of simple fields to represent an address. Obviously, we would typically use ODS for this, but for the purposes of demo, it's a nice, easy way to start. Okay, so you open up the visual form builder, and this is asking you now to create an entity. And there are two places where you'll see this UI. You'll see this UI on the thing that you want to attach data to. So this will be your work types, your ODS entities and stuff like that. And then the global kind of scope, which is what this is at the moment, which is where you're creating reusable pieces of data and controls and views. So it breaks down into the three typical sections that you see on most of these designers. On the left hand side, in this case, we've got some toolbox stuff, which I'll come back to. In the central pane, that's the canvas that I'm presently working on, the context that I'm currently working in, and on the right hand side are the properties of whatever it is I've got selected. So I'm going to start by giving this a name. I'm going to call this an address. Just say it's a reusable address block. Now, ignoring the to do, these are just my notes of things that we still need to do. In terms of defining the data structure, we're now going to do your typical thing that you would see in any database engine. We're just going to create some fields and give them types. So I'm going to create 3 fields. And the first one's going to be street address. And that's going to be a type string. I'm going to come back to this in a second. Then I'm going to create another one that's town, that's also a string. And let's have one that's county. And in this one, I'm going to create something called an option set value identifier. Now, I'm going to come back to that variable types in a minute, because this is where the hierarchical type system comes into play. Against each field, before I go into that, against each field, as I have them selected, the panel on the right hand side is changing to reflect the currently selected field, where I can change additional properties. And you notice 3 traffic light type icons on the right hand side. This is our representation of some of that field level metadata that I was talking about before. So in the case of a street address, I might say that this is going to, I can set a default value. I might say that it's mandatory. The little mandatory red light lights up. I can say it's searchable. Now this is quite important. What we do at the moment with Form Builder is everything goes into the search index. So that means if you've got 50 fields that you've defined against your entity, every time any of those 50 fields change, it's going to re-index it across in the search indexes to populate the list views and the searches and all that kind of stuff. But if you're actually only interested in 3 of those fields, it doesn't make sense that if those 3 fields haven't changed to go and re-index things. So making this field searchable is basically describing to the engine that this is a field I'm actually interested in searching in list views and searches. And what will happen is as you go and create these entities or edit them, it will only actually send it for re-indexing if any of these fields change. So it just improves a little bit of efficiency on how we index things, and rather than doing it every single time you hit the save button and re-indexing everything, it'll just do it based upon what has actually changed that we're interested in. And then we've got the PII flag, which is basically saying this field is something that contains personally identifiable information. Simple as that. And then later, not in the release that this goes out at, but in a future release, there will then be additional tools to allow you to go and search for PII. There's also going to be some additional data in there for things like data classification. So you'll be able to say this field contains confidential data, this field is sensitive, this field is public, whatever we decide to put in there. So there'll be a lot more stuff in there as we go on. Let me go back to this variable type stuff. So what I'm actually defining here is not just an entity. What I'm actually defining is a whole new type, and it's a type that can be reused. So if you think about this address, I can now, once I've saved it, I can now go and create another entity and create a field that is of this type. So it's creating complex types that can be nested into other things. So rather than just a flat database structure of fields, when I add this type as a field on something else, I now get a nested field that goes address.streetaddress.town.county. So I'm creating things that I can embed in other things and create complex types rather than just flat data structures. But everything ultimately boils down to scalar variables, scalar types. So we've got things like string and number. If I just open this drop down up, you can see inside string that itself actually breaks out though, because we have strings that yes, we've got things that just represent some string content, right? But we've also got strings that have specific meaning. And if you look in the workflow editor, for example, you can set up an input variable that is expecting a option set system name. It's still a string, it's still a scalar variable of type string, but it has a very specific meaning. So we have our hierarchical type system describing that stuff so we can be specific about what we want to capture within our data, and then that will then hydrate across the rest of the platform, where in workflow, if you've got a variable that's expecting an option set identifier, it will expect you to use a field that contains an option set identifier, even though everything at the underlying level is just a string. Hopefully that makes sense. The other thing that this drives as well is obviously a string has nothing special about it. It's just some text. This option set value identifier, though, is actually a number. So if you don't know, option sets are basically key value pairs. You've got a number, represents the value, and then a display text. So what I'm saying here is I'm going to go and look for a list somewhere, and I'm going to get that list of values that I can select from, and I'm going to store the number and show the text. So under the covers, it's storing as a number, but I've specified this to be an option set value identifier, specifically because I want the system to understand that I want that to come from a list. And as a result, on the right-hand side, the properties panel is now asking me some additional information. And in this case, it's what option set do I want to use? So this is what is the default option set I want to use to store in this field. So I'm going to select counties. I don't have to use that when I come to design my views. I'll show you that in a second. I can change it to use a different thing because ultimately it's just storing a number. All that's saying is whenever I use this field somewhere, the default list I'm going to show for the user to pick from is counties. Okay, I'll just save that. So I've now got my entity. It's a data structure and nothing more. There's no views, there's no controls, there's nothing to see that data. And I could leave it at that, and I can go and create some new stuff, and I can start pulling this type in as fields and using its data as on my data capture form. But if I wanted a way to say this is the typical way that I enter an address, this is its typical layout, I need views here as well. So against any form builder or entity that we create in this way, we can create one or many views. So I'll add a view, and that now switches me into the design canvas for the form builder itself. So what I'm looking at here is a kind of a live preview of what I will see when this thing gets rendered on something else. And there's a couple of different views I can look at here. So I can say this is an entity that's going to be embedded in something else, in which case I'll basically say this will be used in other forms. But if I want this to be something that I can open up as a blade in its own right and create instances of this thing, I'm probably going to want a header section and a footer section with the ribbon in and all of that kind of stuff. So I can say that this is a blade. And that just opens up some additional zones. On the canvas itself, I can obviously drag things around. I can zoom in and play with, layout. There's some buttons across the top that are contextual for this canvas. First one is what I'm looking at. We've got the design view, and we've also got the code behind view. I'm going to come back to that in a second. In design view, I can also, if I've zoomed in and accidentally dragged this out of the way and all that kind of stuff, I can hit the reset button to get it all back. As I start to drag stuff in and I move in some controls like widget panels, I'm going to start seeing these green boxes appear all over the show that show me places where I can put controls. If I'm finding that a bit messy, I can click this button in the middle to see specifically what it will look like. I've also got a preview button that will open the control as a preview. That looks a bit rubbish because I've not spent any time designing it. And I can constantly keep this refreshing. That shows you an exact representation of what this form is going to be. Even though it's WYSIWYG Designer as it is anyway, the preview just gives you that extra level of comfort to see exactly how it will function, all the code behind runs and all of that kind of stuff, so you can see exactly how it interacts. Let me just clean up the mess that I've just made. Let's delete these. So when you're working in the designer, you've got on the left-hand side, you've got two panels, you've got toolbox and data. Data is just a representation of the data that we've just created in the data editor. I'll show you how we use that in a second. Toolbox is where we can start dragging some of the controls in. So if I wanted to do a couple of text boxes based upon the three fields that I've just created, I can just drag text box in, And then I'll show you how to do this in a second. I can then bind those to the fields that are in the background. If I want an integer input, a drop-down list, all of these things, I just drag them in from the left-hand side. But it's not just about data. It's not just about binding controls to data. It's also about layout. And it's also about other controls as well. So we've got things like the blade header. So this is just putting in place the functionality for the save and close, maximize buttons, and some titles and icons. It's got nothing to do with the underlying data. I can drag in also things that allow me to control layout. So for example, I can have a typical widget panel that goes into the body, with these things with the accordions that expand and collapse. And now that is actually a container rather than a control. So I can put other things inside of it. I can put another widget panel inside of that if I want to, and then inside of that, and so it goes on. If I want to break up, let me just clear that mess up. If I want to break that widget up into, let's say, multiple columns, then I can put in a panel. And the panel is just a container that allows me to split it. So I can say, let's have 2 columns or 3 columns. And now I can start dragging things into those. Obviously, I can move things around as well, so I can, change which location, all the stuff you would expect from a WYSIWYG editor. So we've got containers, we've got controls. Whatever control I've got selected within the canvas will then appear with its configuration properties on the right-hand side. So you'll see a text box. I made a right mess here. A text box contains things like, well, let's make it multi-line, let's make it this height or that height, let's give it a max length of 500, and when the user's entering stuff in there, let's show them how many characters they've got remaining. So there's loads of configuration depending upon the type of control. Just demonstrate that again by putting a label in. So the label's now got a whole different set of configuration parameters. I can make that bold, put it centered, change its background color to blue. Maybe pad it top left, all of that kind of stuff. So they've all got different configuration parameters. In addition, so we've got data input controls, we've got layout controls, but we've also got visualization controls as well. So one that I created yesterday just to demonstrate some stuff was this pie chart. So I can put a pie chart on my form, and this is a little bit different to things like text boxes, because a text box will typically bind to one field. This is going to bind to multiple fields. So I have the ability to create segments and then bind each segment to a value within my data model. Okay, I'm just going to delete that so I can clean up and start again. Did I miss anything off my checklist? Oh yeah, I did. Okay, so let me put this back to being a blade, put my blade header in. What I can do in terms of binding these controls to the underlying data is obviously I can drag the text box in. This then gives me my text box configuration, but nearly all controls have some kind of binding. And this is saying, well, what field in my data model do I want to bind it to? Again, going back to the hierarchical type system, there are some defaults. So in the hierarchical type system, the type string will be given a default control of text box. But all of these controls are also registered as being compatible with a specific type. So if I create a control, such as label is a good example, I can say that that label is capable of displaying strings, numbers, or anything from the option set, from the hierarchical type system. I can target it very specifically or at high level. Now, if I say that something is capable of binding to a string, but my field is actually an option set identifier, it is still capable of binding to that because it derives from the same base type in the hierarchical type system. So my text box, I can bind that to my street address, and then I can add another text box and bind that to my town. But it's not just the values of the text box that I can bind to as well. So I've got 2 bindings on a text box. I've got bind label to as well. So I can set my label as being, town, as you'd expect. But I can actually say, let's bind that to whatever the current value of street address is, which would be a weird thing to do. But if I just preview that, up here I'm entering my street address, and you can see the town label's changing just below it because they're both bound to the same underlying piece of data. where am I up to? What else can we do? There's some common properties to some of this stuff as well. So most controls will have some of these common properties. So I can make things invisible. I can make things read-only. We've got this concept of hint text, which is a way to try and help describe to the user what the field's all about. So let me just unbind my label there. So on this town, I can say, I'm very creative. What is the town? And you'll see a little blue icon has appeared next to the label, which is going to be standard across all controls. So when I preview that, I hover over it, it's actually giving me the details that I've just entered in that hint text. And if I dropped in something like a toggle, which would be a yes/no value, a Boolean value, and I can put hint text in there, you see that there's consistency with how we're going to do things like hint texts. And that'll be common across all controls where you need to be able to provide that information. The last one in common stuff is the form control ID, and this is a way to reference certain controls within the code behind. I'll come back to that in a second. The last thing I want to point out as well is every control has the that has some kind of label and input value has these layout settings, which is where you can see at the moment this form I've got the labels at the top followed by the control. I can change that on an individual control basis by saying I want to put that on the left, and I can also change the split of where that goes across the form. Or I can actually drop back to the view, so deselect all controls, and in the view I've actually got the same thing that will cascade down. So I can say on this form, everything default the labels to the side, and the split needs to be like this. Okay, there was something else I wanted to point out there, and I forgot what it was. You've also got control over things like the width. So when we open a blade, it usually opens at a default width of 450 pixels, but you've got control over that both in the preview, but also whatever you set in the preview will actually become its size when you open it for real. Okay. Let's actually make this do something. Have I missed anything from the key bits? Oh, yeah, one more thing. So that you don't get lost, what you can quite easily end up doing, because you've got complete flexibility now over what your layout's going to be, is I can quite easily get into a situation where I do things like add a panel, and then within the panel, I might add another panel and split it to 2 columns. And then inside that, I might add another panel and split it to 2 columns. And now it's very, very hard for me to select that middle panel. There's 3 panels nested on top of each other there. So there's also the control tree that you can switch to that shows you a tree of everything that you've actually got on your surface at the moment. And I can just go and select from here instead. So if I want to get rid of that root panel, I can select it from the control tree and delete it. Last thing I want to show you there is controls. I've already said I've registered as being able to support certain types. So this field here is bound to my street address, I believe. Yeah, street address. Because street address is a string, the system knows what out of all of these controls on the left-hand side are compatible with that field type. So you can click this button and say, I don't want it to be a text box input. That's the default for that field type, but I actually want it to be something else. And when you click this button, it'll give you a list of the types of controls that can support that field type and still bind to it. So here I can change that to a label, and you say I'm still bound to street address, but now I'm actually showing a label. Now, all of that's a little bit convoluted in terms of being, dragging in my text box, saying that it's bound to this field and all that kind of stuff. So that's where the data panel comes in. I will just clean that up and put in a widget panel to hold my data. Okay, so if I go back to the data panel, all this is it's showing me the structure of everything that we've created in the data editor, and this allows me to drag and drop also. But what this is doing, it's just a shortcut for doing what we did before, which is dragging the text box on, dropping it, and setting the bindings up and the label, title, and all that kind of stuff. I can just drag street address in, and it does all that for me. So it's gone back to the data model, it's got the label for me based upon what I've set in the data editor, and it's set up its binding as well to go to street address. So I'll pull in town, and then I'm going to pull in county, and you're going to see something a little bit different. So county actually opens up as a drop down. Now that's because it knows that it's a number, but a number will typically just drop in one of these. It will drop in an integer field, so it'll allow you to enter a number. But because it's not just number, it's an option set value identifier, so it's still a number, but it's one of these numbers. It knows I should probably show this as a drop down, so it drops in a drop down control instead. And if I run that, we can see we've now got the street address, we've got the town and the county. But I want to show you something that's a little bit different here. This doesn't seem that impressive, but if you tried doing this in Form Builder 1, you'd find it was very, very difficult without going in the IDE and creating some custom controls. It actually supports drop-down lists. So the option set that I've bound this to is a hierarchical one. So I can say it's the United Kingdom, but it doesn't accept that as a selection. It gives me another drop-down box and cascades down to the sub-selections. In fact, whilst we're on the subject of drop-downs, at the moment, this is set to using the option set that I specified against the field. I don't have to do that though. In the properties of this drop-down, I can say, yeah, don't use the one that came from the option set field. Actually, I want you to use the activity categories option set, and it's still valid because ultimately it's still storing a number. There's only one thing in the list, great. It's still valid because it's still storing a number, but now it's not hierarchical and it's not using that value that the option set that's specified against the field. I can also say I don't even want to use an option set, I just want to use a manually configured list. So there are circumstances where you don't want to go to the trouble of creating an option set because you want 3 values in it, or maybe 3 values including nesting and all of that kind of stuff that you only want to create once, in which case you switch it to a manually configured list and you can say let's add some elements, and we'll have what are we doing here, county, we'll have USA, we'll have Australia, and we'll have UK, and these can also be hierarchical as well and go as deep as you want. I'll just call this leaf node and preview it. And we've now got a custom option set effectively that we've just defined within the scope of this form. And again, we've got the hierarchical selection that we mentioned before. Okay, I think I've covered all the main elements of the designer. Let's just see. Right, let's actually do this properly now. So I'll delete that and start again. So I'm going to create 2 views this time because we're going to use these in different circumstances. So I'll drop in a widget panel that's just called address, and I'll lay out my address by putting street address, town, and county in there. Done. But it would be a bit daft if I was using this address type in something else and it started showing a blade inside of a blade. So what I can do is I can create multiple different views for this entity. I can say that's the default view, how I want it to appear when it's in a blade. But actually, I've got this other one where I'm just going to have it with just the fields on. So it would look rubbish if I opened it as a blade like that. But it looks perfect if I was to drop that into something else. Come back to that again in a second. Okay. Yeah, okay. What I'll do now is I'll go from the address. I'm going to create an additional type just quickly so I can show how we can compose these data blocks into other things. I'll create something called a statement that's reusable. It's just got 2 fields on it, and it'll be name, which will be a string. And of course, we'll mark that as being PII. And what the statement is, that will also just be a string. And I'll create a couple of views in here as well. Again, I'll do the default to be a blade. I'll put my typical blade header in there, maybe a widget. And then in there, statement details. I'll drop in my fields. I'll put in the name and the statement, and maybe I'll make the statement multi-line, make it that big, give them 1,000 characters and show them what they're up to. Right, so I've got this blade version that I can use. But I want to be able to embed this as well. So what I'll potentially do here is duplicate that view, create a whole new one and call this one the embedded view. And I'll get rid of the stuff that's in the headers. And in fact, I'll move that out of being in a widget as well, just so I can put, if I want to, I can put this inside of a widget or some other container wherever I'm using it. Okay, so I've now got two types. So let's look at using them. I've got address and I've got a statement. I'm going to go into work types and I'm going to actually attach this to something now. So I've got a work type in here that I've got some instances of, which is matter private client general. Hopefully everybody's familiar with this. It's the work type modeler where you go and actually create all of the stuff to do with your work types. And in here is where you would go into aspects. This is the old aspect designer where you would pull in controls and pull in the old form builder 1 things. All of that is being replaced now with this, which hopefully looks familiar because we've just used it. It's also the form builder. So what we're doing now, we're not creating an entity as such, a reusable piece. We are designing the UI and any additional data capture that we want just on this specific type of entity, which is a matter private client general case. So in here, I'm going to say I'm going to add some fields, and I'm going to say I'm going to have an incident description. So I don't have to just add fields onto my actual entity that are based on those form builders we've just created. I can just add additional fields as well. So I'll put a string in there, and then maybe I'll have an incident location. And now look, I'm saying this is an address. So this is one of the types that we just created, right? Now, when I've got an address selected, because it's complex type, on the right-hand side, I'm not doing anything in terms of setting PII and things. What I have instead is this little arrow that lets me open it up to see the contents of the fields that are in that type. And it's automatically defaulted in whatever we set the address fields to be. So this street address was mandatory, searchable, and PII. But I can change that here. So I can say the typical use case for an address is this field is mandatory, is searchable, is PII. But when I'm using it in this context on this field, actually, I don't want to be able to search it. It's not mandatory. And yes, it still contains PII. So I can reuse those composite pieces of data in my entities, and then I can specify all of the field level metadata individually, but it'll default to whatever that was set in the entity that I'm using. That also means something that it was a little bit different than Form Builder 1 is I can use that address now multiple times on the same form. So I don't know if you've ever tried putting the same form in 3 times on a work type with Form Builder 1. It doesn't work because they all bind to the same underlying 3 fields. Because now we're specifying a field using this complex type, I can have many of them. So let's just pick let's create 2 witnesses, for example. So we'll say we've got witness 1 statement, and that's going to be that statement type we created before. Let's have witness 1 address. That's going to be address. And there I've got 2 instances of address now on this type. And let's just flesh this out a bit more with witness 2 statement. All right, so I've defined a relatively complex data structure, and you can see I've actually got all of these fields now that are on this type. My data panel on the left-hand side has also changed, whereas before it was just a flat list of stuff. Because I'm reusing things, I can now drill into these. Now, what that means is, let me just save this before I forget. If I go into creating a view, I'm now defining a view that is specifically for a matter private client general type. So start with my toolbox. You're going to see that there's some slightly different controls in here. So the editor understands what kind of context it's running in. So it knows that it's looking at defining the data structures and the views for a work item type. And because of that, it gives me some additional controls, like the work item ribbon bar. Now, we're all familiar with what that is. It's the thing that lets you change state, and it's got menu options on it and all that kind of stuff, but it's only relevant to work types. So we drop that on here because it's available here, but that will not be available against just a generic form builder entity, right? Because it doesn't make sense for it to be there. There'll be a different ribbon bar component that you can use, but it won't be the work item one that automatically pulls in things like state changes and stuff. So we're going to have we have contextual controls as well as part of this toolbox. It understands what you're doing, what you're building. So what I'll do now is I'll just pull in the standard blade header at the top, and I want to start showing you how we can use that data that we've just embedded. So I'm going to create a couple of widgets. I'm going to have one that's just called incident details. And then what I want to do is capture my witnesses within another witness, or within a widget. Witnesses, again, you'd probably use participants for this. It's just for the purposes of demo. Within that widget, though, I want to have those two witness fields that we just created. So we had witness 1 and witness 2, both with statements and addresses. So I need to break those up in some way. I could put them in separate widgets, but I've also got all of these other controls that I can use to start breaking my UI up. So I'll pull in a couple of sections. And sections are just like widgets. They're an accordion panel, but they're discretely different from widgets to allow you to break your UI up a little bit. So I'll call this witness 1. And I'll make it collapse by default. And I'll call this one witness 2, which also collapse by default. Something I didn't point out before, we mentioned, let me just drop a text box on there. We mentioned before that you can set fields to be read-only. You can also set containers to be read-only. So here I've got a widget container that's then got 2 containers of type section that contain fields. I can set the read-only at that level as well, and it locks everything within that tree. Okay, so I've got this basic layout that I want for this blade. Now I'm going to start pulling in that data. Now what I can do is I'm going to pull in my incident description. That's just a field I've created here. I'll make that multi-line and I'll leave that as is. Now, for my incident location, I can do the same as what I did before. I can just pull in the street, the town. But you can imagine if I used that address in 50 different places, and then I added a field to address that had some flag on it or something. I've now got to go back everywhere where that has been used and add that field if I want to see it on the data capture. A better way of doing it is, rather than pulling in the individual fields from the nested types, let's just get rid of those, is to pull in the entire entity. So I'm taking this entire incident location entity that is, again, of type address, and that type has views. And when I drop it into here, what it's going to do is embed the entire form that we created for address. Now it looks rubbish because it's effectively a widget inside of a widget. And you see it's showing my blade because we set it up as being a blade. So I've now got 2 blade headers, but in different contexts. It's just bonkers, isn't it? But that's why I can go into here, and one of the properties for a nested form control is to choose which view you want. So I'll change that to view 2, which was the other one that we designed, and now I've got a different view in there, and it looks much more reasonable, and it's all part of this same incident details widget. If I now go into address and add a field to that view, all of these that have got that nested will automatically update. You don't need to go in and start changing things. So let's take that principle and we'll do the same thing with our witnesses. So we've got 2 witnesses on here. I want to pull in my witness statement, which again is using the wrong view. So I'll change that to embedded. And I'll pull in my witness address. And again, change that to that embedded view. Probably should have made the default view for these things to be the embedded view. Witness 2 statement, embedded, witness 2 address. Make that embedded. Let's have a look at it. Okay, so that's what it's going to look like. So I'm going to be able to do my incident description, my street address, my town. I'm going to be able to select from United Kingdom, Anglesey, and then if I've got any witnesses, I can go into those sections and I can start filling in the statement details. Again, they've got an address and a county, and so it goes on. Hopefully you can see that that's made it really easy to create relatively complex data capture. Let's actually go and see this in use though. So that's it. I've designed it in my modeler. I've previewed it. It all looks great. Let's go to an instance. And I just happen to have some cases. This is obviously temporary, opening the Form Builder 2, because all of the stuff that will open this is still using the old stuff. So this is the old Form Builder stuff, the old aspect engine, all of that kind of thing. But my new one, if I click this button, I get the new one that we've just designed. So again, we've got, in fact, this blade's a little bit narrow. You see the titles are going off the top because I've got a rather bonkers title generator. Let's just quickly fix that. I'll go back into my design and I'll make it 630 pixels. So now the next time I open it, it's 630 pixels. Okay, so we've got the ribbon that we added that's got all my state changes. This is the same stuff that we're used to having. It's got the menus on there. I can go and do things to it, but the data capture is all the stuff that I've just specified. Let's make this California, and I can enter my 2 witnesses, and away we go. Save and close. You'll notice in things like, again, just talking about some of the efficiencies that we're adding as a result of this, this ribbon is the place where you click the button to save the record. What we didn't have in Form Builder 1 is the ability to understand if you've changed anything. In Form Builder 2, the default ribbon that you will add to the top for saving will have this thing called Track Dirty turned on. And what you'll notice, hopefully, is, I'll just clear that down, is when I open the Form Builder 2, you see the save buttons are actually disabled, and that's because it knows that you've not changed anything yet. As soon as you go into a field and start changing it, it now knows that this form is effectively dirty and it requires saving. Now, that's important because what would happen in Old World is you'd open up your form like this and you'd click this View Portal button. And so all you're actually doing is looking at the data and then going off to the portal. What Form Builder 1 would do, because it doesn't know whether you've changed any data or not, is it would run a save first. So it would actually save that record with all the events and things that get published in the background. It would send it for re-indexing, even though nothing's changed. Now that it knows that it's dirty, it will just actually invoke the View Portal command without running a save because it knows I didn't change anything. What it does is it takes a snapshot of the data at the point where it starts, and it constantly keeps comparing that based upon some subscription stuff that happens in the background to see if you've actually changed anything. So even if you open a form, change it, but then change it back to what it was with Control Z, it'll go back to being in a not dirty state. So it's going to be a lot more efficient. Anyway, I digress. So that's the summary part of what we can do with Form Builder 2. What I do want to do is just check that I've not missed anything. Yeah, okay. What I do want to do is just show you a couple of more advanced scenarios as well. So we've already talked about things like Form Builder's no longer just about data capture. It can be about data visualization as well. So I'm just going to create a really simple example where we can populate a pie chart of sales. So we'll call this visual test. And I'm going to add a bunch of fields. I'll add 3, and I'll call this sales UK, and that's going to be a number. Sales USA, going to be a number. And sales APAC, Australia. Let's go Australia. Here's a number. Right, so I've got 3 fields available that are all values. I'm going to add a view. Let's make it pretty by making it a blade. Put in our usual blade header. And now I'm going to create a couple of widget sections. I'm going to have this section at the bottom be where I do my data capture. And I'm going to assume that actually the typical use case for this particular view is I want to view the data, not edit it. So I'm going to say that's not expanded by default, so it'll be collapsed. And on there, I'm going to put in my data capture. So UK, USA, Australia. Let's have a quick look at that. So I've got my blade with an empty thing at the top. I've got a collapsed data capture where I can now start entering some units. But what I'm actually interested in seeing is what are the values of those units, but without reading them. So I'm going to drop in at the top a pie chart. Now, these 3 fields are 3 separate fields with 3 separate data inputs and 3 separate controls. This is one control that needs to bind to all 3 of those values. So this is a type of control that's not about data capture, it's about looking at data within the data model. And for that, I can add multiple segments. So I'll add 3 segments in here. You can see the pie chart's now starting to populate. I can give them all labels. I can say this is going to be UK, this is going to be whatever the value is for USA. What was the other one I created? Australia. I can change the colors and all that kind of nonsense. But the bindings. I've now got 3 dynamic binding fields. So I can say this one, I'm going to bind that to UK, that one to USA, and that one to Australia. And now what I've got in my preview, obviously currently I've got no data to plot because all of my data is empty. But as soon as I start entering some data, you see it immediately updates. And as I change it, it's constantly updating. So I can use that type of approach for visualizing data, not just capturing it. But what I might want to do is using things like business rules, so the rules engine that we saw before, I might want to actually change the view that a person sees when they open this blade by default. So I'm going to kind of fudge this as part of the demo, but I'm going to create a second view that's exactly the same as this, and I'm going to put in a control called the view switcher. So all the view switcher is something that will interrogate what views are available for this particular entity and allow you to specify which view you want to see at any given time. So I'll add that to my default view, and then I'll go back into the editor and I'll actually duplicate this one. So I've now got two instances of that same view. On my default view, I'm going to get rid of that data capture because typically what I want to do is when the user opens it, I want them to see the pie chart. I just want them to see the data, not edit it. In fact, I'm going to change the name of that as well to sales. And then in the other view, this is going to be where somebody would go to edit the data. So I'm going to give this the view title of data editor, and I'm going to relay this out a little bit. I'm going to say, in fact, I'm going to take the editor and I'm going to split it into two pieces. I'm going to add a panel in that. I'm going to then split that into two columns. I'm going to move the pie chart to the right, and on the left-hand side, I'm going to put all my data capture. And then I'll get rid of this widget down here. So I've got now two very distinct views, one to look at the data, one to look at and edit the data. So if I preview that from there and actually go into the editor view and add some data. So let's go 15, 25, 32. You can see I can switch between the views at will. And whilst I can't show you this at the moment because we're not built it, what you'll be able to do is dynamically switch views based upon rules. So all those rules that we were looking at before, you'll be able to use those to say, what's the persona? This persona is a data editor. So, okay, by default, I'm going to show you this view, the editor view, and still allow them to switch. But it's more than that. It's more than just dynamically switching the views. We're using the same thing to allow you to build different UI paradigms. So if you needed to build a data capture form that was something like a wizard, where you go next, next, next through a series of data capture, you'll be able to do that with this type of approach. But instead of using the view selector, you'll put buttons on that allow you to go next and previous between the views, if that makes sense. So there's a whole bunch of new UI mechanisms that we're going to unlock by using this system, including being able to take these forms as questionnaires. So let's say you have a new client onboarding process where you just want them to fill in a big long form about stuff. You can design it through this, reusing things like the data capture stuff that we talked about. So nested pieces of composite data, create as complex a form as you want, but then not only make that available as something that you can attach to entities like work items, you'll also be able to create unique single time use links that you can send to customers. When they go to that link, it will then present this form in a nice way for them to fill in without them needing to sign in or anything like that. It'll be all governed by the single use URL that it generates. They'll be able to fill everything in. They'll hit the save button. It'll save that as an entity within the system. So not as a work item or an ODS record or anything like that, but as a dedicated entity. And then you'll be able to trigger a workflow off the back of that. So you'll be able to do all kinds of different things, not just, updating the data capture for your form builders on your work types. There'll be loads of stuff. Right, two more things I quickly want to show you just so I've got full coverage of anything. Everything we've looked at so far has been no code. There's been no code written whatsoever. I just want to drill into the code behind stuff that I've touched on very, very briefly. So I'm going to create a new form for this, and my plan here is I want to create a form that's got a button on it that says whether or not I'm entering data for the UK or not, and depending upon what that button value is, I want to show and hide different fields. So I'm just going to call this code behind test, and I'm going to create two fields. The first one will be is this in the UK, and that will be a boolean, and then I'm going to have a region, which is going to be a number. Now, I want that number. I've not made it an option set because I want it to be different options available for different values, whether my is UK is turned on or off. So I'm going to store always into that same field, but I'm going to present different values for selection based upon whether you are in the UK or not. Again, let's add a view. Let's make it a blade. Let's drop the blade header on, make it pretty. And let's have a widget panel, just called test. And then we'll start dropping some of this stuff on. Now I'm going to put the UK flag on first of all. So that's a Boolean. So it's because it's a true false value, it's automatically defaulted to using toggle because toggle is the default control registered for Boolean values. And then I'm going to drop on region. But I'm going to drop that on twice. Now you can see because I've created those as a number rather than as an option set value, it's now just giving me a numeric input. It's not a drop down. So I'm going to change those to drop down because I want to present a list of values. So this first one, I want this to be the UK region. And in here, I'm just going to use a manually configured list and I'm going to say, okay, it's either in the north or it's in the south. And the values for that are 10 and 20. In this one, this is my overseas region. And in here, I want my values to be USA. And let's give that a value of 1,000. And actually, let's break that down as well into north and south. And then I'll have another one, which is, let's just go APAC. Make that 2,000. And I know it doesn't make sense, but north and south. Okay, so I've now got two drop downs with two different sets of values that bind to the same field. Before I get into the flipping between is UK or not, let's have a look at what happens with my actual form. In fact, before I do that, let's make it so I can visualize what's happening in my form. So I'm going to drop on a label that's just going to show me what the current value is of that underlying region number field. Now, I'm using a label here, which doesn't have any bindings. Well, you can bind. I can just bind it to region and it will show me the value. But I actually want to do something a little bit different. I'm going to change this to selected region equals field : region. So in addition to standard bindings, anywhere where you typically see things like a text box, you can put in some markup that basically says bind this fragment of text to whatever the current value is of the field that's on my data form. And you'll be able to, there'll be some nicer UX-y type stuff to go in here that allow you to create those, a bit like what we do in workflow when you're creating string builders in workflow. Okay, so we've got selected region equals field region. Let's make that just look a little bit pretty. I'll make it bold, put it in the center, give it a background color of that, and actually let's pad it out a little bit as well because it looks rubbish. Right, okay. So at the moment, my selected region is empty because I've not chosen one. And if I select UK, which has only got north and south, you can say I get the value 10 and 20. But this overseas region still says select because 10 and 20 are not valid values for that particular drop down. So what happens if I change that? If I go to USA, nothing happens because I've not yet completed the selection because it's nested. So I can go north in USA. Now you see the UK region's flipped off and the actual value is 10, 10. So you can bind multiple fields to the same value, but you've got to be careful in terms of if you make it so that they're not valid selections on the different controls, that's going to happen. But that's fine. That's probably what we want, to be honest. Just point something out as well. When I went from north in the UK and then I select overseas region USA and I have to select a value below it, if on the drop down configuration I turn off this require leaf selection, that means I can make it valid to say just USA. You see it's now 1,000, so I don't have to select the next box. So leaf selection just controls whether or not you have to go all the way down this tree to select something that's at the lowest level with no children. Okay, so we're in good shape. Our preview looks good. I just need to make it so that this thing actually presents and hides the right thing. Now I'm going to do this with code behind, but everything that I'm about to do, it's relatively simple, is actually going to be present in the actual visual designer anyway. So what I'll be able to do here is, rather than just having this visible yes no flag that I can turn on and off, you'll be able to actually define rules in here as well for these simple types of visible if use cases. But for now, what I need to do is I need to get in the code, I'm going to write some code in here in the code behind. I need to get a reference to this region drop down and this region drop down. Now I could effectively use the code to enumerate this control tree to find the things that I'm looking for. Bit bonkers to do that. So what I can do instead is I can go to my drop down, I can go to the standard form control property of form control ID. And I'm going to give this a name of DDL UK. Now in code, I can reference DDL UK and I've got an it points me at that control and I can start changing its properties. I'll do the same with overseas region and I'll call this one DDL, let's just call it DDL other. Now in my code, the ready function is called when this form becomes available for use and it's before it's being displayed. So I can go in here and I can say, what can I say? I can say model. Now model is the parameter that's passed to this function and that is giving you access to everything that's on that form. So you've got access to the underlying data model. So all of the stuff that we may have created as all the different fields and the nested types and complex types, I can access all of those as model.data.address.street. You know what I mean? I can get access to all of the data that I've got within my model. And similarly, I can also get access to all the controls. So I can say model.controls.ddluk, and that's going to be, if I could see, that's going to be the control that we named DDLUK. So all I need to do there is say, okay, DDLUK, you're visible if, and then I need a condition. So the condition is going to be if my model.data.isUK, which is the flag that we created. So just to prove the point there, isUK is the identifier of this field. In the code, I'm referring it to as model.data.isUK. The reason why we've got brackets on it is because they're actually observable things rather than just variables. So we call them as a function to get the current value. And then also what happens is, because I've called it to get the current value, it sets up an automatic subscription that says whenever that value changes, re-evaluate this visible if condition. And then the other one was DDL other, I think. And we'll say you're visible if my if not model data is UK. All being well, what should happen now is my UK region starts off hidden, so it should show me the overseas region drop down and is UK will be false. And if I change that, it should flip them around, all being well. And it does. So overseas region, APAC, South, 2020, switch that to is UK. And because that's now not a valid selection, my selected region is cleared out and I can select the UK one. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Absolute last thing, which is going a bit further. So again, I've used a contrived example there of doing a visible if. You'll be able to do that through the UI anyway. You won't need to write code for that. But the code is there if you need it to be able to do more advanced scenarios. Now, if you want to go even further than that, so you want to be able to have a text box that's red, for example. I don't know why you would, but let's say this text box that we provide out of the box is not good enough for what you need it to do, then that's fine as well. We can go to the next level, which is the slightly more code than low code, and that's through the developer IDE. So I will save that actually. If I go into the developer IDE, we now have some new scaffolding in here. I'll just get rid of all this code, where I can select, just as I can with widgets and things like that, to create any UI component. We've now got Form Builder control. Everything within Form Builder 2 is driven through just pure JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and configuration. There's no need for C# code or anything like that, so you're not having to open up Visual Studio and build DLLs and all that kind of stuff. You can just create them from here. So I'll call this my custom text box forum, so I can find it. Now what that's done is it scaffolded all the code I need for a custom control, and I can do whatever I want in this custom control. So I've got full access to the entire data model. I've got full access to the APIs, just like I have with anything that's in the UI. I can call external services, I could iframe things. I could do whatever I want in this control now. I'm at a much lower level in the code. It's not just the code behind. I can control every element of this control. And it doesn't have to be a control that binds to one thing either. It doesn't have to bind to one field. You can basically say, this is a custom control for this entire entity type. So we've just created the address entity. We can have a custom control that binds to address entities, not fields, the address entity itself, and can be a completely custom view that you create in code. So you can do whatever you want. But what that scaffolding's done is it's created me a form control manifest, which is the thing that says, hey, I've got a form control available. And I'm just going to add some, I'm not going to explain this too much, but I'm going to add in here that this, because it's a text box, it's available to be bound to strings. The default scaffolding will just create you a text box and then allow you to customize it. So I'm going to say that that can be bound to strings. This will now become a control that I can use to replace any other string bound control in my UI. It creates me a factory object. I'm not going to go into that too much, but it also creates me the 3 components that make up a form builder control, which is my configuration panel that appears on the right hand side when I'm in the designer, the preview panel, which is what appears in the visual designer itself, and then the render component, which is what appears at runtime when the user needs to interact with this control. So I'll just quickly bust my cache because I've introduced something new. I've created a manifest. This system needs to reload all of that stuff. And I'll quickly go back to forms and views, and then I'll be done. Okay, so let's go to our address that we created earlier. And all of these are presently bound as text boxes. You'll see in my toolbox that I now have, what did I call it? My custom text box forum. That was it. So I've got a whole new controller that I can use, which just happens to be a text box. But you can see that I've created that in the IDE. I've extended the entire form builder thing with something new, but I've also made it available as a string. So I can now go, all of these text boxes that I've got on here, I'm going to change them to use my new one and just click the button. Job done. I am actually done. A couple of things that you can't see yet that I did want to quickly mention. We've got, all the demo's been about attaching stuff, creating reusable entities that you can then attach to things. That's not going to be the only use case for it. You'll be able to mark entities as being entities in their own right. So you can imagine this as, and it'll automatically build you like an administration UI for it, where you can create, load, update, delete elements of those entity types. You can think of that as like option sets on steroids. So option sets are quite limited. You've got a value, a display name, and then there's a couple of other properties you can fill in as well. They're hierarchical. Our entities, you'll be able to define whatever you want. So IDs, values, whatever field you want, mark that entity as being an entity that's exposed through the entity engine, and then through the entity engine UI, it'll give you a list of all the things that are of that type, and you'll be able to go in and create them. Then you'll be able to use those as things that you can reference in other things. So whereas before we were using a drop-down list to select a region, you'll be able to have a drop-down list that references your custom list of custom entities, all that kind of stuff. Kind of mentioned the questionnaires and forms. The entities that we create through this won't necessarily always be things that we attach to other things. They can be things that we can send out to people, say, hey, go create me one of these, by designing a form, generating a unique link and sending it out. I am done. So I'm going to hand back to Teresa to close. Unless there's any questions.
Thank you very much. I have a question.
Let me look. Did you press the button, Steve? Is the button, are we nearly there yet? Oh, we're nearly there. No, not quite. The button is being pressed as we speak.
Fabulous. Okay, I think somebody did just put their hand up, or they were waving. I'm not entirely sure what was going on there, but we were kind of feeding questions from the back, so I think we're okay. So I guess, yeah, so Ben, I would normally finish these sessions with diary dates, but you know, Ben stole my thunder on that. So all I'm going to say is thank you very much, everybody, for joining and sticking with us. It was a long session, especially for those of you in other countries. So thank you ever so much, everybody. As always, open for questions. Button pushed. There we go. Just hit the button. So we are version 7.7. Okay. thank you very much, everybody. As always, if you've got any questions, feel free to contact me. Other than that, we will see you in, I think, September. Thanks very much.